first time we tried to leave the campsite, we walked for almost an hour. When we stepped out of the trees, our own campfire was still burning. The coffee I'd left beside my chair was still steaming. That was the moment I stopped believing we'd taken a wrong turn. We hadn't walked in a circle. Somehow, the campsite had. If I hadn't lived through it myself, I'd tell you the same thing everyone told my friend Ethan after he came home without me. You're remembering it wrong. You got lost. Stress does strange things to people. But none of those explanations account for one thing. A paper map that changed every time we unfolded it. It started 3 days earlier. Ethan had a habit of buying things nobody else wanted. Old cameras that barely worked. Rusted pocket knives. Camping gear older than both of us. So when he called and said he'd found the perfect campsite in a secondhand bookshop, I wasn't surprised. What makes this one so special? I asked. It isn't online. I laughed. Neither are half the campsites in this state. No, he said. I mean, it doesn't exist. An hour later, I was standing beside him in his apartment, looking at a faded paper map spread across his kitchen table. It had been folded so many times the edges were beginning to split. Most of it showed old forestry roads that had long since been renamed or abandoned. Someone had covered the map with handwritten notes. Good fishing. Road washed out. Bear activity. The handwriting changed halfway across the map. The newer writing looked hurried, almost nervous. In the lower right corner, someone had written just 3 words. The forgotten campsite. Below the words was a symbol. A rough circle with 3 lines meeting in the middle. It looked almost like a campsite marker. If someone had drawn it from memory instead of copying it. You bought this? I asked. For $4. From who? The owner couldn't tell me. That caught my attention. What do you mean? He said he found it in a box after buying out an estate. Didn't know where it came from. I looked closer. Unlike the rest of the map, the ink used for those 3 words looked almost fresh, as if someone had written them recently. Look at this. Ethan pointed to a narrow dirt road that branched away from every marked route before ending at the strange symbol. There isn't a campground listed anywhere around here. I pulled out my phone. Google Maps. Nothing. Apple Maps. Nothing. Even an offline hiking app showed uninterrupted forest where the paper map claimed a campground existed. Probably closed years ago. Exactly. He grinned. So it'll be empty. We left early the following morning. The drive took nearly 4 hours, winding deeper into the mountains until paved roads became gravel, and gravel became little more than packed dirt. Cell service disappeared long before we reached the turnoff. The strangest part wasn't losing signal. It was losing traffic. For almost an hour, we didn't pass another vehicle. No hikers. No cyclists. Not even logging trucks. It felt like the road had quietly stopped existing behind us. You ever get the feeling a place doesn't want visitors? I asked. Ethan smirked. You're starting early. I'm serious. He glanced out the windshield. I'll admit, it's quieter than I expected. Quiet wasn't the right word. The forest felt, paused. No birds called from the trees. No insects buzzed through the open windows. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move. Eventually, Ethan slowed the truck. There, half hidden beneath vines, stood a weathered wooden post. An arrow had been carved directly into it decades earlier. Most of the lettering had faded away. Only 2 words remained. Forgotten campsite. The moment we turned onto the narrow dirt track, both our phones vibrated. GPS signal lost. At exactly the same time. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. The uneasy feeling we'd joked about all morning had quietly settled between us. Ahead, the road disappeared beneath a tunnel of pine branches. And somewhere beyond those trees, something was waiting for us. The dirt road twisted through the forest for another 15 minutes before ending without warning. Not a gate. Not a fence, just a clearing. For a moment, I almost laughed. After everything we'd imagined, the campsite looked completely ordinary. 6 campsites sat in a loose circle around an old stone fire ring. Weathered picnic tables leaned slightly with age, and rusted lantern hooks stood beside each site like forgotten fence posts. A narrow trail disappeared toward what sounded like a river somewhere beyond the trees. It wasn't abandoned. It was simply empty. "So this is it," Ethan said, climbing out of the truck. Not exactly haunted. His voice sounded louder than it should have. The forest swallowed the echo almost immediately. I unfolded the paper map one more time. The symbol marking the forgotten campsite was exactly where we stood. Satisfied, I folded it and slipped it into my backpack. Neither of us noticed the symbol had changed. Not yet. The afternoon passed peacefully. We pitched the tent, gathered firewood, and cooked dinner while the sun filtered through the tall pines. If you'd taken a photograph of us then, you'd never guess anything was wrong. The only strange thing was the silence. Even peaceful forests have sound. Birds arguing overhead, leaves rustling, branches creaking. Here, nothing. It felt as though every living thing had stepped back and was watching from somewhere we couldn't see. Around sunset, Ethan frowned at his phone. "Hey, come look at this." His GPS had finally loaded. Only, it wasn't showing a forest. The blue location dot blinked in the middle of a blank white field. No roads, no trees, no river, no campground, nothing. "Mine's doing the same thing," I said, pulling out my phone. We refreshed the map. The blue dot jumped nearly a mile away, then back, then disappeared entirely before reappearing exactly where it had started. "It's probably because we don't have service." I said it more for my own benefit than his. Ethan nodded. Neither of us believed it. Darkness settled faster than it should have. One minute the trees glowed orange with the last light of day. The next, night had swallowed the forest whole. We lit the campfire. The warmth helped. The silence didn't. Then, somewhere beyond the tree line, a log cracked. Not ours. Another fire. We both looked toward the sound. A second crack echoed through the woods. Then another. The unmistakable sound of someone tending a campfire. Close enough that we should have seen the glow between the trees. There wasn't any. "No one's here," Ethan whispered. "I know." Another crack. This time from our left. Then another. Behind us. The sounds didn't move. They multiplied. 3 different campfires. Then 4. Each one close enough to reach in less than a minute. Yet the darkness remained completely black. No voices. No laughter. No flashlights. Just invisible campfires burning all around us. I stood. I'm checking. Before Ethan could stop me, I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the nearest sound. 20 steps into the trees. The crackling stopped. Instantly, I swept the flashlight across the forest floor. Nothing. No ashes. No fire ring. No footprints. Just untouched pine needles. Then Ethan called from behind me. "Owen." His voice sounded uncertain. I turned around. Our campsite was still there. But something had changed. "The sign," he said. The old wooden sign at the entrance to the clearing was facing us now. I was certain it hadn't been before. I raised my flashlight. The faded words were gone. In their place, freshly carved into the wood, were 4 words that made my chest tighten. "You found it." I lowered the flashlight in disbelief. "Ethan, tell me you saw that." I did. Hands shaking, I aimed the beam at the sign again. The message had disappeared. Once more it simply read, "Forgotten campsite," as though it always had. Neither of us spoke. My phone vibrated in my pocket. 1 notification. 1 new photo added to your gallery. I didn't take a picture. You don't have your camera out. I opened the gallery anyway. The newest image had been taken at 7:14 a.m. tomorrow morning. It showed our campsite from above. The campfire was cold. The truck was gone. Only one person stood in the clearing. Me, facing the trees, as though I was waiting for someone to arrive. Or, unable to leave. I zoomed in. There was something else in the picture, half hidden between the pines behind me. A row of tents. Dozens of them. Some modern, some impossibly old. None of them had been there a moment earlier. Then Ethan quietly asked, "Owen." I looked up. He wasn't staring at the photograph anymore. He was staring into the forest. I followed his eyes. Between the trees, canvas tents were appearing one by one, not fading into view, not emerging from the darkness. Simply existing, as though the forest had decided we'd finally noticed them. And every single one of them was facing our campsite. Neither of us moved. The tents stood in complete silence, scattered between the trees like they had been there for years. Canvas tents, modern backpacking tents, old family tents with faded stripes, one military-style shelter. Some looked brand new. Others were little more than rotting fabric hanging from broken poles. The only thing they had in common: every entrance faced us. Not one zipper moved. Not one flap stirred. It felt less like we were looking at a campground, and more like a crowd, watching. Ethan finally broke the silence. "We're leaving." I didn't argue. We threw our sleeping bags into the truck, leaving behind half our gear. Neither of us cared about the cookware or the cooler anymore. The engine started on the first turn. Relief flooded through me. Ethan shifted into drive and followed the narrow road we'd arrived on. Neither of us looked back. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The road should have reached the highway by now. Instead, the trees began to look familiar. A fallen log crossed a shallow ditch. A split pine leaned over the road. "I've seen that tree," I said quietly. Ethan didn't answer. A minute later, the road opened into a clearing. Our clearing. Our campfire still burned. Our tent still stood exactly where we'd left it. The truck rolled to a stop. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan whispered, "That's impossible." We tried again. This time, we marked the road with bright orange survey tape every 100 feet. We drove slowly, carefully, watching for every landmark. 20 minutes later, the first strip of orange tape appeared. Only, it wasn't hanging from a tree beside the road. It fluttered from a lantern hook beside our campsite. Every marker we tied along the road now surrounded the clearing, as if the forest had gathered them while we weren't looking. That was when I noticed the map sticking out of my backpack. It hadn't been there a moment ago. I was certain I'd left it inside the truck. When I unfolded it, my hand started shaking. The road we had driven in on was gone. The paper showed only one symbol now: the circle. The 3 lines inside it had stretched outward until they touched the edge of the page. Like roots or cracks. Beneath the symbol, words slowly darkened across the paper. They weren't printed. They were being written, letter by letter. "You are still arriving." Ethan stared over my shoulder. "Tell me that's a joke." Before I could answer, the ink disappeared. The page looked old again, except for one change. There was no longer a symbol marking our campsite. Instead, there were 2. One sat where we stood. The other was directly beneath it, buried. The air changed. The silence became so complete it made my ears ring. Then, from somewhere among the invisible tents, a phone started ringing. Not mine, not Ethan's. An old ringtone, the kind people used years ago. Another phone joined it, then another. Soon dozens of phones rang from every direction. None of them were answered. The ringing stopped all at once. My own phone buzzed. No service. Yet the notification wasn't about signal. It was a voicemail from my sister. Received 3 days ago. Then another and another. Messages poured onto the screen. Missed calls, voicemails, texts asking where I was, all arriving at the same time. Ethan looked at his phone, his face drained of color. They've been calling us. I looked at the timestamps. We hadn't been camping for one night. According to the outside world, we had already been missing for 4 days. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees. For the first time since arriving, the forest didn't feel like it was holding us back. The road appeared beyond the clearing. Clear, open, real. Go, I shouted. We ran. The truck was only 50 yards away. Ethan reached it first and threw open the driver's door. I grabbed the passenger handle. It wouldn't move. I pulled harder. Nothing. The handle felt solid, locked in place. Owen, Ethan yelled. It's stuck. He climbed back out and reached for me. Our fingertips were inches apart. Then they weren't. Without taking a step, I was suddenly farther away. The distance between us stretched. Not quickly, smoothly, like the clearing itself was expanding. No, Ethan shouted. He ran toward me. I ran toward him. Neither of us got any closer. Something invisible stood between us. Not a wall, a boundary. The forest behind me grew darker. The birds fell silent again. The truck looked farther away with every heartbeat. Ethan slammed both fists against empty air. I'll get help. You won't find this place again. I shouted. I will. His voice echoed. Mine didn't. The last thing I saw was Ethan climbing into the truck, tears streaming down his face as he drove away. The clearing became quiet once more. The invisible tents remained. Watching, waiting. Ethan did everything he promised. He called the police. Search and rescue teams spent days combing the forest. They found the dirt road. It ended after half a mile at a rock slide that had blocked it years earlier. Beyond the rocks, there was no campsite, no clearing, no river, nothing. The authorities concluded I'd gotten lost somewhere beyond the slide. They never found a trace of me. Months later, Ethan unfolded the old paper map one last time before throwing it into his fireplace. Just before the flames reached it, he noticed the symbol had changed. The circle was gone. In its place stood a small gray gravestone. Beneath, it was a single handwritten line that hadn't been there before. One returned. One remained. Ethan says the map burned completely. I believe him. What I don't believe is that it was destroyed. Because every so often, someone uploads a photograph of an old camping map to an online hiking forum. Every one of them has the same handwritten words in the corner. The forgotten campsite. And every time I see the picture, there's one more campsite marked on the map than there was before. The ranger station had been abandoned for 8 years. That's what the sign outside said. The windows were boarded shut. The roof had partially collapsed. Weeds pushed through the front steps, and a rusted chain wrapped around the front door. There wasn't a single sign that anyone had worked there in years. The strange part, I could still remember the ranger smiling at us the night before. I could still hear his voice. I could still remember the 3 rules. Sometimes I wonder if we'd have survived had we simply turned the truck around when we first saw him. Instead, we thanked him. Then we drove straight into the forgotten campsite. There were 5 of us on that trip. Me, my younger brother Ben, our friends Sarah and Jared, and Olivia, who had been trying to convince us for the entire drive that arriving after sunset was a bad idea. She wasn't superstitious. She just hated setting up camp in the dark. We should have booked earlier, she muttered as we pulled into the state campground. She was right. Every campsite was occupied. Families were roasting marshmallows. Kids rode bicycles between campers. Lanterns glowed beneath the trees. A large wooden sign near the entrance confirmed what we already knew. Campground full. Ben sighed dramatically. So 4-hour drive for nothing. Jared was already reaching for his phone. I'll find another campground. No signal, Sarah said, holding up her screen. Mine had already dropped to emergency calls only. Odd. We'd had reception less than 5 minutes earlier. Then Olivia pointed through the windshield. What about that? About 50 yards beyond the main entrance stood another sign. Older. Much older. Its paint had almost completely peeled away. vines wrapped around its posts. Someone had carved a strange symbol near the bottom, a rough circle with 3 lines meeting in the center. Above it, barely visible beneath years of weathering, were 2 words. Forgotten campsite. No official park logo. No distance. No map. Just an arrow pointing into the forest. Ben grinned. Looks like we found the overflow campground. I don't think that's official, Sarah replied. Before anyone could answer, someone knocked gently on my driver's window. I hadn't seen him approach. One moment the road beside us was empty. The next, a park ranger stood there. His uniform looked decades old. Not dirty, not torn, just outdated. The badge on his chest had lost most of its shine, and his wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow that hid his eyes. I rolled down the window. "Evening," he said. His voice was calm enough to lower your heartbeat. "You folks looking for somewhere to stay?" "We were," I answered. "Looks like we're out of luck." He glanced toward the faded sign without turning his head. "There's still room." "The forgotten campsite?" Ben asked. The ranger nodded once. "You may camp there." He paused. "But only if you remember 3 rules." No one interrupted him. Something about the way he spoke made joking feel inappropriate. He raised 1 finger. Never whistle after dark. A second finger. Never call someone's name more than 3 times. Then a third. And whatever happens, don't let your campfire die before midnight. Ben gave a polite smile. "That's pretty specific." For the first time, the ranger looked directly at one of us. His eyes were strangely unreadable. "They aren't rules to keep you safe." He spoke so quietly we almost missed it. "They're rules to help you know when it has already found you." Without another word, he stepped away from the truck. We watched him walk toward the trees. He never looked back. About 20 yards into the forest, he passed behind a thick pine. A second later, he should have emerged on the other side. He didn't. He was simply gone. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Ben finally let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, that was weird. We should leave," Olivia said immediately. Her voice wasn't panicked. It was certain. "Based on what?" Jared asked. An old guy with a talent for disappearing behind trees. "I don't know what I based it on," she admitted. "I just know I don't want to follow that sign." Ben looked at me. "Liam." I glanced at the darkening sky. The nearest town was almost an hour behind us. Every official campground nearby was already full, and we'd already lost phone service. "We'll stay 1 night," I said. "If anything feels off, we leave at first light." Olivia didn't argue. She simply looked back toward the forest. "I think it's already too late." The dirt road narrowed until branches brushed against both sides of the truck. Then, without warning, the trees opened. The forgotten campsite looked almost inviting. 6 empty campsites circled a large stone fire ring. Old picnic tables stood beneath towering pines. A narrow footpath disappeared toward the sound of running water. Everything looked perfectly normal, except there wasn't a single sign that anyone had camped there recently. No tire tracks, no footprints, no discarded firewood, nothing. It looked less like an abandoned campground and more like one that had been waiting. We set up quickly. Ben cracked jokes while pitching his tent. Jared argued with the portable stove. Sarah wandered the edge of the clearing, taking photographs. Only Olivia stayed close to the fire. Every few minutes, she'd glance toward the trees, as though she expected someone to walk out of them. When I asked what she was looking for, she answered without hesitation. "The ranger. You think he's checking on us?" "No." She stared into the darkness. "I don't think he ever left." The words lingered in my mind long after the conversation ended. Night arrived all at once. The last light vanished behind the trees, and the forest became a wall of black. We built a large campfire. The flames pushed back just enough darkness to make the woods beyond seem even deeper. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Then Ben started absent-mindedly whistling while making coffee. It wasn't even a song, just a few quiet notes. Sarah looked up instantly. The first rule. Ben stopped. He laughed. Guess we're all doomed. Nobody laughed with him. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, the exact same whistle came back. Every note, every pause, perfectly copied. Ben slowly lowered the coffee pot. Okay, who did that? No one answered. The whistle came again, closer this time, still hidden beyond the trees. Then, a third time. This time it came from behind us. Not the forest, the river. Olivia stood so quickly her chair tipped over. Don't answer it. I wasn't planning to. No, she whispered. I don't think it was talking to you. A cold breeze swept through the clearing. The campfire dipped low for just a second, then returned to normal. No one spoke for several minutes. The only sound was the fire, until Sarah quietly said, "Where's Jared?" Every head turned. His chair sat empty. His flashlight was gone. No one had seen him leave, and none of us could remember exactly when he'd stopped sitting beside us. The silence that followed was heavier than anything we'd experienced all night. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, a familiar voice called out, "Liam!" It was Jared. At least, it sounded exactly like him. The voice came from somewhere beyond the trees. Too far away. Much farther than he could have walked in a few seconds. Olivia grabbed my arm before I could stand. "Count." "What? If it calls your name, count." The voice came again. "Liam." I felt every hair on my arm stand up. Ben looked at me. "Don't answer." Then, for the third time, "Liam." The forest fell silent. No footsteps. No movement. Nothing. Almost a full minute passed before another voice broke the silence. "Guys!" We spun around. Jared stumbled into the clearing from the opposite direction, breathing hard. He looked confused. "Why are you all staring at me?" Ben spoke first. "Where were you?" Jared frowned. "I've been collecting firewood." Sarah pointed toward the darkness. "We just heard you calling Liam." His expression changed instantly. "I never called anyone." Then he held up the bundle of firewood in his arms. I wasn't even near that side of the forest. Before anyone could respond, every log in our campfire shifted at once. Not from wind, not from settling. They moved together, as though something unseen had just stepped into the flames. And the fire began to shrink. At first, I thought the fire was simply burning through the wood. Then Ben threw another thick log onto the flames. It should have flared. Instead, the log blackened almost immediately. The fire grew smaller. Jared frowned. "That doesn't make sense." He grabbed another armful of dry wood and stacked it onto the fire. For a heartbeat, bright orange flames climbed high enough to light the surrounding trees. Then they collapsed, not gradually, as though something underneath had taken a long, slow breath. The fire shrank until only a handful of glowing coals remained. No matter how much wood we added, it refused to grow. Olivia looked at me. "We've already broken 2 rules." Before I could answer, Sarah suddenly pointed toward the tree line. "Look, far between the pines." A flashlight beam drifted silently through the darkness. Back and forth, like someone walking a routine patrol. "The ranger," Ben whispered. Relief washed over us. I cupped my hands around my mouth. "Hey!" The flashlight stopped moving. Whoever held it now faced directly toward us. "Can you hear us?" Nothing. No reply. No movement. Just the steady white beam shining between the trees. Then, the light went out. Not dimmed. Not turned away. It simply vanished. "We're finding him," Jared said. Nobody disagreed. We grabbed our flashlights and followed the trail toward where we'd seen the beam. The deeper we walked, the stranger the forest became. Our footsteps sounded wrong. Soft, as though the ground beneath us wasn't dirt anymore. After several minutes, Sarah stopped walking. "Listen." There was again the crackle of a campfire, close enough to touch, yet our flashlight beams found only empty woods. Another crackle answered from somewhere farther away. Then another. Within seconds, campfires surrounded us, invisible, burning in every direction. Ben whispered, "How many people are out here?" Olivia answered without taking her eyes off the trees. "I don't think those fires belong to people." The flashlight beam appeared again, only 20 yards ahead. We hurried toward it. Instead of a ranger, we found a building. The ranger station. Its porch sagged beneath years of decay. Windows were boarded shut. The park emblem had almost faded away. A heavy chain wrapped around the front door. Rust covered the padlock. Ben stared at the building. "This can't be right." I shined my flashlight through a cracked window. Dust coated every desk. Spider webs stretched from the ceiling to overturned filing cabinets. No one had worked here in years. Sarah noticed a bulletin board near the back wall. Pinned to it was a faded photograph. A ranger stood smiling beside 5 campers. The flashlight nearly slipped from my hand. It was him, the same ranger, the same uniform, the same calm expression. Below the photo was a handwritten date, 8 years earlier. Then Olivia quietly said, "Look at the campers." At first, I didn't understand. Then my stomach turned. One of the campers looked almost exactly like Ben. Another resembled Sarah. One could have been Jared's older brother. None were identical, just familiar enough to make your brain reject what your eyes were seeing. Beneath the photograph sat an old leather patrol log. Most of its pages had rotted away. Only the final entry remained readable. Last patrol. Location, the forgotten campsite. Status, ranger missing. No date, no signature, nothing after it. We ran. None of us spoke. None of us looked back. The road had to be nearby. We'd only walked a few hundred yards. Instead, the trees opened. Our tent stood before us. The campfire waited in the center of the clearing, exactly where we'd left it. Only now, it was burning again, bright, strong, as though it had never struggled at all. Standing on the opposite side of the flames was the ranger. He removed his hat. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. Or, I tried to. Every time I focused on his features, they seemed to shift. Not grotesquely, just enough that I couldn't remember them a second later. His eyes settled on each of us in turn. When he finally spoke, it wasn't only his voice. Dozens of voices echoed beneath it. Men, women, children, layered together so perfectly they sounded like one impossible person. Calmly, he repeated the rules. Never whistle after dark. Never call someone's name more than 3 times. Never let the campfire die before midnight. Ben took a shaky step backward. "What are you?" The ranger didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the fire, then back at us. With genuine sadness in his eyes, he said, "You keep trying to remember the rules, because you keep forgetting the last time." Silence. Nobody breathed. The ranger tilted his head slightly. "You still believe? This is your first visit." Every memory I had of driving into that campground suddenly felt uncertain. Not gone, just incomplete. Like pages missing from a book I'd read before. The fire suddenly flared so brightly we had to shield our eyes. When I looked back, the ranger was gone. So were the flames. Morning sunlight poured into the clearing. The fire pit was cold. Our tents were covered in dew. It looked as though no fire had burned there all night. We packed without saying much. This time, the road led us straight back to the highway. No loops, no missing turns. The official park office was already open. I asked the woman behind the counter about the old ranger station. She frowned. That building closed 8 years ago. What happened to the ranger? She hesitated. No one knows. He disappeared during a patrol. She lowered her voice. People still tell stories about him. Before we left, I signed a campground visitor log. Weeks later, I couldn't stop thinking about that place. So I drove back alone. The ranger station was exactly as abandoned as before. The visitor log inside the park office was still on the counter. I turned to the page where I'd signed my name. It was there. So were the names of Ben, Sarah, Jared, and Olivia. But beneath our signatures, someone had written one final entry in neat, careful handwriting. Patrol complete. 5 campers returned. See you next season. There wasn't another person in the building, but as I closed the logbook, I caught the faint smell of wood smoke. And somewhere far beyond the trees, a whistle answered another whistle. Maybe every survivor remembered different rules. Maybe they saw different things lurking between the trees. Some found a map. Some met a ranger who should have been gone for years. Some escaped. Others never did. But every story led to the same place. The forgotten campsite. If you ever find an old map with a campsite no one else can find, don't follow it. Some places aren't forgotten because people stopped going there. They're forgotten because they were never meant to be found again. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, please leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe to the Forgotten Campsite and turn on notifications so you never miss another journey into the woods. And before you go, tell me in the comments, if you had been there, would you have followed the old map or turned back the moment the ranger gave you those 3 rules? Until next time, sleep carefully, because somewhere hidden deep in the forest, a campsite is still waiting for its next visitor.